Okay, good evening, everybody. A Freilich and Chanukah. It's a special opportunity to be back here again. B'shus the Roshei Kolel and all of my chaverim looking around the room. Many good friends here. The goal of tonight is to, Amrit Hashem, share with you an idea that we could think about as we say Hallel every day. The end of the last paragraph of Hallel, we say, Mikimi me'ofar dal me'ashpos yorim evyon. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu raises up the dal, the impoverished, and me'ashpos yorim evyon, and from the garbage, HaKadosh Baruch Hu uplifts the evyon, the destitute. What can we be mechavein when saying that pasuk during the Shevach and the Hodah of Hallel? In a relationship, in a marriage, or in any other form of connection, oftentimes, if you say something that you regret, it might change the dynamic of that relationship forever. Right? In a marriage, for example, there are definitely words that should be off limits. And therefore, no matter how much tension there is right now, no matter how disappointed I may be in you or in the conversation we're having, certain things I know I should not say. And if I don't control myself and I let it out, it's not easy to climb back out of that pit. And it could very well be decades later, on some nuanced level, things have never been the same because of that one word or that one phrase or that one shtach that I couldn't hold myself back from. When we think about our relationship with Hashem, what are the things or what are the words that might fit into that category? Where it's not just a mistake right here and now, but it's something that's so severe, that's so damaging, that's so destructive, that it could theoretically be there for the rest of my life. And the way that I feel towards Hashem, and even more devastatingly, the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu feels towards me, perhaps will never be the same. What are some examples of those things regarding our relationship with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu? There's an interesting correlation we find between the Yontif of Sukkot and the celebration of Chanukah. I think on the most pashut shot, the correlation is, when do you finally take down the Sukkah? That's Chanukah time. We still have our schachab, but Amrit Hashem, Zos Chanukah is miyuchad, it's mesugel, it's a special day for taking down the Sukkah. I'll share with you a couple of sources. I'd like to analyze this briefly. And I think by getting to that nuance, that kernel, that basis that connects Chanukah and Sukkot, we might have a deeper appreciation of what exactly we're celebrating. And then every morning when we say, Mikimi me'ofar dal, it could be more meaningful, it could be more uplifting. We know the famous debate, the machlokes in Shabbos, regarding what is mahadrin and mahadrin? What is the most ideal way of lighting the menorah? And Beis Hillel tells us famously, Holech v'mosef, mosech v'holech. You start with one, and every day you add another candle. And Beis Shammai says the exact opposite. You start with 8, and then every day you diminish until the last day of Chanukah you only have one there. There are two different ways of understanding this machlokes in the Gemara. What exactly is the opinion of Beis Hillel, and what is the machlokes between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai? So the more accepted approach, it seems from the Gemara itself, is that Beis Hillel was of the opinion, Mailin v'kodesh ve'ein maridin, which means we always go up when it comes to Kedusha. And therefore, just like levels of sanctity, the same thing is true when it comes to being Mosef in the candles. Mailin v'kodesh ve'ein maridin. And Beis Shammai tells us that we want to make the candle lighting mitzvah analogous to the Parei Chag. The Parei Chag on Sukkot, we know every day of the 8 days we brought a special carbon, and we would have this diminishing number of karbanos every single day. So in order to keep that parallel between the lighting of the menorah and the karbanos that were brought on Sukkot, Beis Shammai was of the opinion we have to start with 8 and then go down 1 every single day. Beis Hillel doesn't say back to Beis Shammai, what are you talking about? Why in the world do you care that it has to be somewhat similar to Sukkot? This is a whole different yontif. This has no shaykhis. This has nothing to do with Sukkot. He doesn't say that. His opinion is, I hear what you're saying, I understand that connection, but I feel there's an overriding logic, Mailin v'kodesh ve'ein maridin. But what is that connection between Chanukah and Sukkot? It's interesting, the first real nevuah that we have about the miracles of Chanukah come from the Navi Chagai. Chagai lived in the beginning of the Bayis Sheni, the Second Temple period, and it's a short sefer, but in the beginning of the second parak, Chagai speaks about a very special nevuah. Let's read this together, source number 2. This is as they've been granted permission to go back to Yerushalayim after the 70 years of the Galus Bavel, and now they're beginning to rebuild. Bashvi'i, on the 7th month, Be'esrim ve'echad lechodesh, on the 21st day of the 7th month, Haydevar Hashem b'yad Chagai ad Navi Lemor. The word of Hashem came to Chagai saying as follows. So what does that mean, the 7th month, the 21st of that month? What day is that on the Jewish calendar? That's Hoshana Rabbah. That's the last day of Sukkot officially. So Chagai gets this particular prophecy on the last day of Sukkot, and he says, B'Shem Hashem, Mi bechem hanisher she'ros habayis hazeh b'chvodo harishon. Turning to the older segment of the population, how many of you were here who were actually zocha to see the first Beis HaMikdash? Umatem roim mosoata halokamo ka'ayin beinechem. And now you're looking at the beginning of the Bayis Sheni, which is nothing in contrast to what the Bayis Rishon was. So Chagai is telling Klal Yisrael, it's the older generation, this must be very disappointing. However, he gives them chizik, he encourages the Jewish people, again quoting from Hashem, that just like I was with you when we all left Mitzrayim, V'ruchi omedis besochachem, and my ruach, I was together with you, my presence was bringing you out. Al tira'u, do not fear. Ki cho amar Hashem tzavakos, because so says the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Od achas ma'ati, in a little bit, not right now, but in a few hundred years, v'ani marish es hashamayim ve'es haaretz, I am going to shake up the heavens and the earth. Esayom v'escharava, the sea and the dry land. I'm going to shake things up. What is Hashem referring to? So Rashi explains, as well as the Radak, this was right after the downfall of Malchus Paras, after the Persian Empire that was the world power at the time really began its descent. The next world power that was on the rise was Greece, was Malchus Yovan. Chagai is saying that there is this other nation that's growing stronger, that's gaining more control and influence in the region. They are becoming the next world power, and their intent is limshul aleichem lahatzir lechem. They want to rule over you. They want to cause you distress. However, va'ani marish, but the prophecy is, I will shake things up in the future. Dr. Rashi explains Rashi, Benisim hanasim livnei cheshmonayim. That's a direct reference to the miracles that will happen in the times of the Chashmonayim. So again, we see this very mystifying correlation between the Yontif of Sukkot and the miracles of Chanukah. The prophecy regarding Chanukah takes place at the Yontif of Sukkot. But it's not just Beis Shammai, it's not only Chagai Hanavi, it's the Torah itself that seems to teach us some very unique, intimate connection between these two special times. In Parshas Emor, after the listing of all the Moadim, so Psukim tell us about the mitzvah of the holiday of Sukkot, the obligation of living in a sukkah. Laman yedu doroseichem ki besukkos hoshafti es b'nei Yisrael. Then right afterwards, the beginning of the next chapter. Now we know the chapters themselves were not part of the Masorah, right? They came much later on from non-Jewish sources. But when you look at the actual Chumash, right after HaKadosh Baruch Hu is teaching us about the Yontif of Sukkot, Vayadaber Hashem al Moshe Lemor, Hashem speaks to Moshe saying, Tzaves b'nei Yisrael v'yikchu elecha shemen zayis zoch. Take for yourselves pure olive oil, crushed up, for what mitzvah? For the mitzvah of the Ner Tamid. Says the Baal HaTurim, Somach shemen zayis l'sukkah. What is the juxtaposition between the mitzvah of shemen zayis and sukkah? Lomar shegomrim ahalel kol shmonas yemei Chanukah kederech shegomrim oso kol shmonas yemei Chag. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving us a little bit of a glimpse. This is one of the ramazim in the Torah itself, a hint to the Yontif of Chanukah. Just like you say the complete Hallel for all 8 days of Sukkot, you're going to say the complete Hallel for all 8 days of Chanukah. So it's not just Beis Shammai, it's not just Chagai Hanavi, but it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'chvodu Ba'asmo is teaching us there's something going on over here. If someone was to ask you the question, why do we celebrate Chanukah for 8 days? I'm not even asking the question of the Beis Yosef. Why 8 and not 7? But why do we have 8 days? Where did that come from? What would 99.9% of the Jewish population answer to that question? Mordechai. You're taking way too long to answer the question. Because the Ner, the Pach Shemin, lasted for 8 days. Right? That's what the Gemara says. It's pretty simple. That's what we learn about in elementary school. The Pach Shemin lasted for 8 days. The truth is, it sounds like from a few different sources that may not have been the initial reason why they established 8 days of Chanukah. In the Seder Hadoros, and this is going back to the early 18th century, the Seder Hadoros gives us really the historical documentation of all of the major events that took place in history. He goes through the famous personalities and their svarim. So when he speaks about the miracle of Chanukah, source number 6, he writes as follows. This is the second to last line, quoting from earlier sources. Yan Kodim Lachain, the reason why they established 8 days of Chanukah is because during the persecution of the Greeks, Lo hayu yecholim laso sukkos mipnei lo chatzeihem. They were not allowed to make sukkahs. They were assered from celebrating the Yontif of Sukkos because of their oppressors. How many years were we kicked out of the Beis HaMikdash for when the Greeks took over? 3 years. So we weren't able to celebrate the Yontif of Sukkot. What else were we also not able to celebrate? Everything! If we're out of the Beis HaMikdash for 3 years, that means every single Yontif, every single carbon, every single Musaf, it was batal. They took it over, they didn't destroy it, but they turned it into a temple for Zeus. The ultimate disgrace was made of the Beis HaMikdash. But yet, as soon as the miracle of Chanukah takes place, we get back to Beis HaMikdash. Let's celebrate this Yontif for 8 days because we weren't able to celebrate Sukkot. Aruch HaShulchan, also quoting the same Masorah, the same tradition, he's bothered by the very obvious question, how does this fit with the Gemara? The Gemara says pretty clearly that 8 days comes from the fact that miraculously the Pach Shemin that only had enough oil for 1 day lasted for 8. So the Aruch HaShulchan says, no, initially they had in mind 8 days corresponding to Sukkot. That was even before the miracle of the oil took place. They were victorious. They saw the Yad Hashem. They felt the HaKadosh Baruch Hu's guiding hand. And they wanted to celebrate, and they were koveya. They established Chanukah as a yontif. And then, like the Gemara tells us, then we had this amazing miracle of the oil lasting for longer than it was supposed to. That they viewed as a siman min hashamayim. This was a divine sign that our establishment, our ashara, our estimation of 8 days, was the proper way to celebrate. But that wasn't the siba, that wasn't the reason for 8 days. It was Hashem giving us a little pat on the back. Well done, young men. Good choice. So there's something very, very unique and special about Chanukah and Sukkot. What is that thread that connects these two special times? Parenthetically, this approach does answer the famous question of the Beis Yosef. Right? The famous question is, why do we have to celebrate 8 days if the miracle itself was only officially 7? There wasn't enough oil for 1 day. The technical answer could be, very simply, because that wasn't really what it was about. In the Al Hanisim, when we speak about the establishment of the Yontif, although we mentioned V'hidliku nerus b'chadzras kadshecha, there's no discussion, there's no allusion to the fact that there is a miracle that happened. It just says V'kavu shmonos yemei Chanukah elu. And it could very well be because this is referring to before the actual miracle of the Shemin took place. There is a very chashuv Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Yaakov Naiman. He was the Rosh Yeshiva in Petach Tikva and the Yeshiva Or Sameach, or Yisrael rather. And the boys generally were very serious, very into the learning. One young man, his name was Yehuda. He came from a very frum family, but he was having a difficult time in yeshiva. It wasn't going so smoothly. And one of Yehuda's friends approaches Rav Naiman and says, listen, Rebbe, I don't like being a snitch, but I have to tell you what's going on. Really, Yehuda's ditching night Seder, Motzei Shabbos, and he is meeting up with friends. He's hanging out with the wrong crowd. He's going to movies and doing other things that the Bachrim were encouraged not to participate in. So the Rosh Yeshiva said back, do me a favor. Next time you hear about him making plans, please let me know. No, Rebbe, I can't do that. I don't want to throw him under the bus. He said, listen, I'm not going to mention your name, and we're all working together for Yehuda's benefit. Please let me know. I want to try to help. So it happens to be that next Motzei Shabbos, the young man goes back to Rosh Yeshiva and says, I did hear Yehuda schmoozing about plans that he's taking the number 2 bus and going down to Ben Yehuda. Rosh Yeshiva says, thank you so much for the information. Right after Shabbos is over, Rav Naiman gets a taxi. He goes down to Ben Yehuda Street, knowing that he'll definitely beat the bus by 10 minutes or so. And before he leaves, being a cold winter night in Yerushalayim, he puts on his very heavy, very chashuv fur coat. Long fur coat. He's now standing there in the middle of the hustle and bustle, young men and women enjoying themselves on a Saturday night. And the number 2 bus pulls up, and people are coming out. Lo and behold, Yehuda on his way out, he sees his Rosh Yeshiva standing there. Hat, fur coat. So you can imagine Yehuda's face. He was white. He was pale, like Casper the Friendly Ghost. He didn't know what to say. Rosh Yeshiva said, Good vach, Yehuda. Speechless. He said, Yehuda, it's freezing outside. You don't even have a sweatshirt with you? You don't have a jacket? Speechless. So Rav Naiman takes off his big fur coat. He says, do me a favor. Just promise me you're going to keep this on you throughout the entire evening. Keep it on you. He takes off the coat, puts it around Yehuda, buttons it, gives Yehuda a big hug and a kiss, and says, Good vach. Gets back in the taxi and goes back to the yeshiva. Yehuda, when he tells over this story, he says that fur coat, although I felt extremely awkward wearing it the entire evening, but I wouldn't take it off. Mashiva said not to. But I could still feel that hug, I could still feel that embrace of the fur coat now many decades later. There's a famous machlokes in the Gemara Kedushin between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, that when the Torah tells us, Banim atem leHashem Elokeichem, that we're viewed as Hashem's children. Is this conditional? Is this based on how we behave and how we observe the mitzvos? Or do we say, no matter what we do, no matter where we go, we are always viewed as Hashem's children? Rabbi Yehuda says, Bizman she'atem noagim minag banim, when you're acting like children, then kruyim banim, then you're viewed as children to Hashem. However, einatem noagim minag banim, but if you're not noeg kibanim, you don't act like a child, then einatem kruyim banim, you're not considered Hashem's children. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Reb Meir comes along and says, Bein kach ubein kach banim atem leHashem Elokeichem, no matter what, even if we're deviating from the Derech HaTorah, we're always viewed as a Kadosh Baruch Hu's children. This sounds like a very strange, very radical, very extreme machlokes. If you were to ask any observant Jew, do you believe that Hashem loves you unconditionally? Hopefully the answer would be, yes. That's the same guy who thinks Chanukah's 8 days because of the Shemin, right? But we all believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves us unconditionally. What exactly is this machlokes? They're mamash arguing over this massive hashkafa in whether Hashem kind of looks the other way and no longer wants anything to do with us if we're not listening to His instructions. So some of the Sifrei Machshava explain that of course both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir agree that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is never going to abandon us. HaKadosh Baruch Hu never leaves Klal Yisrael nationally, and individually we have a kesher shel kayama, we have a lasting relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Perhaps the machlokas here is, when we deviate, when we ignore HaKadosh Baruch Hu's instructions, does that have any impact whatsoever on the relationship? Hashem's always there for us. Hashem's always holding our hand, but does that chip away a little bit at the bond between me and the Kadosh Baruch Hu? Rabbi Yehuda says, yeah, obviously Hashem still loves you, but He can't view you in the same way, so to speak. There's a mechitza that you've created. And Reb Meir says, Bein kach ubein kach, banim atem leHashem Elokeichem, meaning, even if you're totally ignoring and disrespecting HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is Hashem happy with you? Are you giving the Borei Olam nachas? Of course not. Does Hashem have clear expectations of what He wants from you? Yeah. But it doesn't take away the relationship. It doesn't chip away at that connection. How do we paskin, by the way? Not to get involved with what does that even mean? What is it relevant? There's a Tshuvas Rashba that says, even though generally when you have a debate between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, this is one of the exceptions. We paskin like Rabbi Meir. Bein kach ubein kach banim atem leHashem Elokeichem, meaning even when you are deviating, you're not impacting the relationship ki hu zeh. How does Hashem view it when we're involved with averos? How does Hashem view me when I'm in a time of yerida, where I'm not inspired, I'm not doing what I did a few years ago? There's a Rashi in the beginning of Parshas Masai where he quotes the Medrash Tanchuma, explaining the reason why the Chumash lists all the different journeys of Klal Yisrael is just like a father who's taking his son, who was not well, he was sick, and he was taking his son to try to find a refuah for him, and then finally when his son gets better, and they're walking back home, they had this long journey, so then they look at all the places, and the father says, wow, here we slept, here you had that terrible headache, over here you were freezing cold, remember that boy chick? That's why Hashem feels it necessary to repeat all of the places that Klal Yisrael traveled. The Maral explains, Mishum ahavaso elav, because Hashem's infinite, unconditional love for Klal Yisrael, Hashem was pointing out all the places we weren't feeling well. What does that mean, we weren't feeling well? Does that mean we were physically ill, emotionally, psychologically? What does that mean? These were the places that Klal Yisrael were involved with hate. These were all the places of merida, of rebellion. These were the places that symbolize a lack of gratitude, a lack of basic hakaras hatov. All of these places are being pointed out because here you, Klal Yisrael, sinned, you failed. But how does Hashem view it? As we're walking back home, He doesn't take it personally, so to speak. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't like when I do a chait, not because it offends Him, but because I'm hurting myself. The same exact way a father feels when his child is not well. That same compassion, that same desire to do anything humanly possible to bring a refuah, that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu feels, so to speak, when we're involved with chait. Bein kach ubein kach banim atem l'Hashem Elokeichem. I had the opportunity one time, I was in a pediatric oncology floor, and there was a boy together with his parents who were leaving, and they were saying goodbye to the nurses and some of the medical staff, and it turns out this boy was going for treatment for a while, and today was his last day. And I saw firsthand what this Rashi looks like in real life. Right? The father and the mother are walking into the different rooms. Remember, we came here that late Saturday night, and we had to get that infusion, and they're saying goodbye to this person. That's mamish the exact same way HaKadosh Baruch Hu feels when He sees us shakua, when He sees us saturated in chait. There's nothing I take offense to, but I feel for you. That's bein kach ubein kach banim atem l'Hashem Elokeichem. Sukkot, the Gra explains famously, Sukkot is not the celebration of the Ananei HaKavod. Sukkot is the celebration of the return of the Ananei HaKavod. They left during the Chet HaEgel. We had them when we left Mitzrayim. They were there to protect us and to comfort us. Once we fell during the Chet HaEgel, then the Ananei HaKavod left. When did they return? After Klal Yisrael was Zoche to Tshuva, after Yom Kippur, and as we were about to start the process of building the Mishkan, then those clouds came back. The celebration of Sukkot, the 15th of Tishrei, is not a commemoration of the Ananei HaKavod, it's a commemoration of Hashem's acceptance of our Tshuva. Why do we celebrate the Ananei HaKavod? Explains the Beis Elokim, the Mabit. There were so many other miracles that took place. We celebrate the Ananei HaKavod because those were the one thing we didn't really need. We needed the man, we needed the Be'er Shel Miriam, we needed to survive. Those were essential. The Ananei HaKavod we could have survived without. That was in the Shika. That was Hashem's hug. I just want you to be comfortable. I don't want you to have all these bugs around you. I don't want it to be cold in the evenings or hot during the day. That's the celebration of Sukkot. Says the Pnei Yeshua, this is the exact same theme. Obviously, every Yontif has its own dimension, its own many multiple layers of meaning. But says the Pnei Yeshua, what's the great celebration of this Ner lasting for 8 days? We didn't really need it. Because Klal Yisrael at this point in history, because the Greeks said, you should write on the Keren HaShor that you have no chelik belokei Yisrael, you have no relationship with Hashem. Why the Keren HaShor? Right, could you imagine that meeting around the conference room with Antiochus sitting there and all the generals, and they're talking about what different decrees should we place upon the Jewish people, Bris and Limud HaTorah, and one guy raises his hand and says, let's make them all write on the horn of an ox that they no longer have any connection with Hashem. And the room was silent. Right? Marvin, can you please try to stay on task over here? All of your silly ideas, you're crazy. Explains the Maral, they did this bedafka. There was a real evil here. They wanted us to feel that because the Keren Hashor, because of the Cheder Egel, we were no longer the Am HaNivcher. We were no longer Banim Atem L'Hashem Elokeichem. And the tragic part of that was that we started to believe that message. Explains the Pnei Yeshua. The Nes of the Ner, this is the very last line of number 13, says the Pnei Yeshua, it was an Eis Rotzon Lohodia Shechozru Lechiboson Harishona. HaKadosh Baruch Hu just wanted to show Klal Yisrael, it's true, you did fail. It's true, right here, you have so many Jews who are falling prey to the illusion of Greek society, but you're back right where you left off from. It didn't impact the relationship at Ki Hu Zeh. The underlining theme of both Chanukah and Sukkot shares this message, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu is sending us probably one of the most important ideas we should take as a nation. That even though we fall, even though we sin, even though we fail, Banim Atem L'Hashem Elokeichem, I want you back. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is taking off that big fur coat and embracing us with it. Don't ever think you lose anything in the relationship between me and you. So what do we have in mind? Every day of the 8 days of Chanukah, Mikimi me'afardal me'ashpois yarim avyon, explains the Gra, and I think now with this background we could appreciate what the Gra is saying. We say Kadosh Baruch Hu, He raises up the poor, the impoverished. Who are the impoverished? Says the Gra, those who are dal she'ein lo klum. I cannot say that I have anything to show. I cannot take necessarily pride or pleasure in my accomplishments. But you raise me up. I'm poor. Me ashpos yorim evyon, says the Gra. This is referring to someone, right? Ashpos, garbage. Shematunaf ba'averos. I am mamish, disgusting with averos. I have the shmutz of Isser on me. But what do I have to show? V'toiv li'istakel, but I want to get out of this mess. V'lalos mehen, I want to raise myself up. Ubocha u'mischarid alayt, and therefore I have charata. I'm crying in Kadosh Baruch Hu, please bring me back to you. Hashem Yisbarach Yorem Oso, Hashem lifts us up. Where does He take me? Is it now, okay, you could be over here. I'm going to have Rachmanas on you. Not the same as it was before. Okay, but you're trying to do tshuva. Says the Gra, Lahoshivi im nedivim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, if you're doing tshuva, you're sincere, I don't care that you were in the ashpa yesterday. I'm going to bring you up to the level of the avos. Im nedivei amo, to the nobles of my people, to the tzaddikim. I want you back, because really, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you never left. Maybe I'm disappointed in some of the decisions you've made, but bein kach u'bein kach, banim atem l'Hashem Elokeichem. We should be zocha mitzvah Hashem this Chanukah, as we're celebrating, as we're singing Shira, as we're saying Mikimi mi'ofar dal, to feel that unconditional love of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and to try to internalize that as much as humanly possible. If Hashem could have unconditional love for me, then maybe I could have unconditional love for you. Maybe we could spread that love like we spread the light of Chanukah. Wishing everyone a freilich and Chanukah.